8-year-old girl gave birth to alien-looking baby. How did this happen? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the small room, punctuating the tense silence. Lila sat upright in a stark white hospital bed, clutching the strange baby to her chest. Her small fingers curled protectively around its smooth, greenish skin. Its oversized black eyes blinked slowly, unnervingly calm, as though it were studying everything around it. Lila's heart thumped loudly in her chest. She didn't understand what had happened, how this had happened, but she knew one thing for certain. This baby, whatever it was, needed her. The door burst open suddenly, making her flinch. In stormed a doctor in a white coat, followed closely by 2 nurses and her panicked parents. The doctor's brow furrowed in disbelief as his eyes locked onto the creature in Lila's arms. He stumbled mid-step, as though his brain was struggling to process what he was seeing. Lila, her mother, Sarah, cried as she rushed to the bed. "What is that? What's happening?" Lila's father, Michael, froze at the foot of the bed, his face pale as a sheet. "Oh my God," he whispered. The doctor snapped out of his trance, barking orders to the nurses. "Get an incubator in here. And call for security. We need to quarantine this room immediately." "No," Lila cried, tightening her hold on the baby. "Don't take him. Don't touch him." "Sweetheart," her mother said, her voice trembling as she reached out. "What's going on? Where did he come from?" Tears welled up in Lila's wide eyes as she shook her head. "I don't know. I just woke up and he was here." Her mother looked stricken. "What do you mean he was just here?" The doctor stepped forward, his expression strained but professional. "We need to take the baby, ma'am. We don't know what we're dealing with. It could be dangerous." "No," Lila screamed again, clutching the baby closer. The small creature cooed softly, its voice a strange, melodic sound that filled the room. Lila looked down at it, her fear momentarily easing as its oversized eyes locked onto hers. "He's not dangerous," she cried, glaring at the doctor. "He's just a baby. He's mine." The room fell deathly silent. Sarah gasped audibly, and Michael staggered backward, bumping into the wall. "What did you just say?" her father stammered. "Yours? What does that mean?" Lila blinked at him, confused. "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "I don't know, but I have to keep him safe. Please." The doctor turned to the nurses. "I don't care what it takes, get that child out of her arms. We need to run tests immediately." Lila screamed as the nurses moved toward her, their hands outstretched. "Don't touch him. Don't." The baby let out another soft coo, but this time, the sound was different. The lights in the room flickered as though something electrical had surged through the building. The nurses froze in place, their faces paling. "What the hell?" one of them whispered, backing away. The doctor hesitated, his eyes darting between the baby and the flickering lights. "What's going on here?" Lila looked down at the baby, who blinked up at her, unbothered. She didn't know what was happening, but in that moment, she felt something, an invisible bond tying her to this strange creature. "He's mine," she whispered again, more softly this time. "I have to protect him." Hours later, the hospital room was on lockdown. A security guard stood outside the door, and no one was allowed in or out. Lila sat curled up in the bed, still cradling the alien-looking baby in her arms. Her parents sat in the corner of the room, whispering anxiously to one another. "This isn't possible," Sarah muttered, her voice shaky. "How could this happen? What even is that thing?" Michael rubbed his face with his hands. "I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Lila's just a child, this can't." He trailed off, shaking his head. Sarah glanced at Lila, her expression torn between fear and concern. "We need answers." The door creaked open, and the doctor stepped back in, this time accompanied by 2 men in dark suits. Their serious expressions sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Who are you?" she demanded. One of the men stepped forward, flashing a badge. "Special Agent Grant. This is Agent Harris. We're with the Federal Investigation Unit for Unexplained Phenomena." Michael shot to his feet. "Federal what? What does that even mean?" It means, Agent Grant said calmly, that this situation has escalated beyond the hospital's capabilities. We're here to investigate. He turned toward Lila, his gaze cool and calculating. And we're going to start with you. No, Sarah snapped, moving protectively toward her daughter. She's just a child. She doesn't know anything about this. Agent Harris stepped forward, his voice softer than his partner's. We understand this is overwhelming them, but we need to know what happened. This is unlike anything we've ever seen. Lila looked up at the agents, her small arms still wrapped protectively around the baby. You're not taking him, she said firmly. Agent Grant raised an eyebrow. No one said we were taking him. The baby cooed softly again, and once more, the lights in the room flickered. Agent Grant's expression faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. That's unusual. Michael took a step toward the agents, his hands balled into fists. You leave her alone. She's been through enough already. Agent Harris held up his hands, trying to calm the situation. Mr. Turner, we're not here to hurt anyone. We're here to help. But we need to understand what's going on. Lila looked between her parents and the agents, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't trust these men, not one bit, but she could see the fear in her parents' eyes. She took a deep breath, her voice small but steady. I don't know how he got here, she said quietly. I just woke up and he was next to me. I think he's lost. The agents exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Lost? Agent Grant repeated. What makes you think that? Lila looked down at the baby, who blinked up at her with its large, inky black eyes. Because I feel it, she whispered. He's scared, and he doesn't know where he is. But he knows me. He trusts me. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Finally, Agent Harris spoke. Can we see him? He asked gently. Lila hesitated, glancing at her parents. Sarah nodded slowly, though her expression was strained. It's okay, sweetheart, she said softly. Reluctantly, Lila shifted the baby in her arms so the agents could get a better look. The baby stared at them, unblinking, its pale green skin almost glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. Its tiny fingers curled and uncurled, as though it could sense their tension. Agent Grant's mask of calm cracked ever so slightly. This isn't human, he muttered under his breath. Agent Harris shot him a look before turning back to Lila. And you don't remember anything? Anything strange that might have happened before you woke up? Lila shook her head. No, just a bright light. It felt like I was floating. Her voice trailed off as she tried to remember more, but the details were fuzzy, like a dream she couldn't quite hold on to. Agent Grant scribbled something into a small notebook. We'll need to take samples for testing. No, Lila said sharply, cutting him off. You're not taking him away. The baby cooed again, and this time, the lights in the room didn't just flicker, they dimmed completely. A low hum vibrated through the walls, and for a split second, the air felt heavy, electric. The agents froze. What was that? Agent Harris asked, his voice tight. The baby turned its head slightly, its black eyes fixing on Agent Grant. A sudden chill ran down the man's spine. This isn't normal, he muttered. Sarah rushed to Lila's side, wrapping her arms protectively around her daughter. You need to leave, she said firmly to the agents. You're scaring her. Agent Grant opened his mouth to protest, but Agent Harris placed a hand on his arm. Let's step outside, he said quietly. We need a moment. The agents exchanged a final glance with the family before turning and walking out of the room. As the door closed behind them, Michael let out a shaky breath. What the hell is going on? He whispered. Lila looked down at the baby, who blinked up at her innocently. It's okay, she whispered, stroking its smooth head. I'll protect you. I promise. The baby cooed softly in response, and for the first time, Lila felt something new, something she couldn't explain. A quiet, reassuring hum filled her mind, like the echo of a distant voice. Outside the hospital room, Agents Grant and Harris stood in the hallway, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. The air still felt heavy, charged with the strange energy that had filled the room moments ago. You felt that, didn't you? Harris asked quietly, his brow furrowed. It wasn't just me. Grant shook his head, closing his notebook with a snap. No, it wasn't just you. This thing, whatever it is, affects its surroundings. And that girl, she's connected to it. Somehow. Harris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. She's just a kid, Grant. You saw her. She's scared. We can't treat her like a threat. Grant shot him a sharp look. I'm not saying she's a threat, but you don't know what we're dealing with here. We need to get that thing out of her arms and into a secure facility before it causes more damage. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Harris countered. You saw what happened in there. That baby, or whatever it is, doesn't want to leave her. And I'll bet she won't let it go, no matter what we say. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but he was cut off by the sound of hurried footsteps. The hospital's head doctor, Dr. Evans, approached them, his face pale. Agents, you need to see something, he said breathlessly. It's urgent. Without another word, he turned and motioned for them to follow. Harris and Grant exchanged a look before falling into step behind him. Back in the hospital room, Lila sat quietly, stroking the baby's smooth, greenish skin. Her parents were watching her carefully, whispering to each other in the corner of the room. What are we going to do, Michael? Sarah murmured, her voice low. This isn't normal. It's impossible. Michael ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. I don't know. But we can't let those agents take her. They'll treat her like some kind of experiment. Sarah's eyes flicked to Lila and the baby. Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, there was something undeniably peaceful about the way the baby looked at Lila, as if it trusted her completely. I think she's telling the truth, Sarah said softly. About the baby being lost. Michael looked at her in disbelief. Sarah, listen to yourself. It's not even. He stopped mid-sentence as the baby let out another soft, melodic sound. The room grew still, as if the very air was listening. Lila looked up at her parents, her voice quiet but firm. He doesn't belong here. But he's scared. He needs me. Michael opened his mouth to argue, but before he could say anything, the door swung open again, and Agents Grant and Harris stepped back inside, their expressions grim. Lila, Harris said gently, kneeling down so he was at eye level with her. We need to talk to you, okay? About what's happening. Lila clutched the baby closer, her wide eyes filled with distrust. You're not taking him. We're not here to take him, Harris said quickly, throwing a warning glance at Grant. We just want to understand. Lila hesitated, her gaze darting between the agents and her parents. What do you want to know? Harris glanced at the baby, its black eyes watching him unblinkingly. He swallowed hard before asking, You said you saw a bright light before you woke up with him. Can you tell us anything else? Anything at all about what you remember? Lila frowned, her small brow creasing in thought. But I don't know. I was sleeping. Then there was a light and I felt like I was floating. Like I wasn't here anymore. And when I woke up, he was next to me. Grant's face hardened. Are you saying you were taken? Abducted? Harris shot him a glare. Don't scare her, Grant. Lila shook her head quickly. No, it wasn't scary. It was warm. Like I was safe. And then I woke up here. Sarah took a shaky breath. Agents, what's happening to my daughter? Is this real? Before Harris could respond, the hospital lights flickered again, brighter this time. A low hum began to vibrate through the walls, growing louder and louder until the sound seemed to settle in their very bones. What the Grant started, but the baby let out another melodic coo, and just as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. The room was silent again. Grant backed up slightly, his expression a mixture of anger and fear. That's it. This isn't natural. We need to secure that thing now. No, Lila screamed, her arms tightening around the baby. You can't take him. Harris stood quickly, holding up a hand. Grant, calm down. We're not taking anyone yet. Not without understanding more. Grant ignored him, reaching for his radio. I'm calling for backup. This is beyond us. Suddenly, the baby turned its head toward Grant, its black eyes narrowing ever so slightly. The air in the room thickened, and Grant stumbled, clutching his chest as if he couldn't breathe. What's happening? Sarah cried, backing against the wall. Harris rushed to Grant's side, grabbing his arm. Grant, what's wrong? Grant gasped for breath, his face pale and slick with sweat. I can't. He dropped to his knees, his radio clattering to the floor. The baby cooed again, and the pressure in the room lifted. Grant fell forward, coughing violently as Harris helped him sit up against the wall. Lila looked down at the baby, her voice soft and calm. Stop. It's okay. He's not going to hurt us. The baby blinked up at her, letting out a quieter, softer sound. The tension in the air evaporated completely. Grant stared at the baby in terror, his voice hoarse. It did that to me. Harris turned to Lila, his expression serious but not unkind. Lila, did you feel anything when that happened? Did the baby tell you to do that? Lila shook her head quickly. No, he didn't mean to. He was scared. Harris looked at the baby, still calm and quiet in Lila's arms, and exhaled slowly. Whatever it is, it's powerful. In a conference room down the hall, chaos erupted. Doctors, scientists, and government officials gathered around a long table, speaking over one another as they reviewed footage from Lila's room. The lights flickering, the strange hum, and Agent Grant's sudden collapse. All of it was caught on camera. This isn't possible, one scientist muttered, staring at the screen. This defies everything we know. It's an anomaly, another said. We need to isolate the child and the specimen immediately for further testing. No, Dr. Evans interrupted firmly. She's a child, not a test subject. We can't traumatize her. The room erupted again, the arguments growing louder. In the corner, a quiet man in a black suit tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the table, his sharp gaze fixed on the footage. Finally, he stood. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. We're looking at something unprecedented, the man said, his voice low and calm. If this child and that being are connected, we need to proceed carefully. We can't afford to act rashly. Dr. Evans nodded in agreement. We need to gain her trust. It's the only way we'll learn anything. Back in the hospital room, Lila sat quietly as the baby slept in her arms. Its breathing was slow and steady, its strange little chest rising and falling in rhythm. Lila could feel the connection between them, like an invisible thread tying their hearts together. Her parents sat nearby, watching her carefully. Sarah broke the silence, her voice gentle. Sweetheart, how do you know he's not dangerous? Lila looked up at her mother, her expression serious. Because he's just a baby. He's not trying to hurt anyone. He's just scared. Like me. Michael exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. And what happens now? What do we do? Lila looked down at the sleeping baby, her voice soft but firm. We keep him safe. We don't let anyone take him. The baby stirred softly in Lila's arms as the quiet tension in the room hung heavy. Its dark eyes blinked open, locking onto Lila's face with an unnerving sense of familiarity. She smiled faintly, brushing her hand over its head. It's okay, she whispered. I won't let anything happen to you. Her words seemed to calm the baby, its breathing slowing as it nestled closer to her. Across the room, Sarah and Michael exchanged worried glances. Their daughter's bond with the strange being was impossible to ignore, but so was the chaos building outside their hospital door. The door creaked open suddenly, making everyone jump. Agent Harris stepped inside, his expression a mixture of calm and urgency. He closed the door carefully behind him and turned toward the family. I convinced my partner to take a breather, he said quietly, his voice steady. But we don't have much time. This situation is escalating, and people are going to start making decisions that you might not like. Michael frowned, his voice sharp. What does that mean? Harris took a deep breath, stepping closer. It means the higher-ups don't care that Lila's just a kid. All they see is a being that they don't understand, something that could be a threat. If we don't come up with a plan, they're going to take that baby, whether you like it or not. No, Sarah said firmly, shaking her head. We won't let that happen. I know, Harris replied, glancing at Lila, who was staring up at him cautiously. That's why I'm here. I think you're telling the truth, about the baby being lost, about it not meaning harm. But we need to prove it before someone makes a call we can't undo. How? Michael demanded. What are you suggesting? Harris hesitated before answering. We need to let them run tests. Basic tests, nothing invasive. Just enough to show that the baby isn't dangerous. Lila's arms tightened instinctively around the baby. No. They'll hurt him. I won't let them, Harris said quickly, kneeling down so he was eye level with her. His voice was gentle but firm. I promise. I'll be there the entire time. No one will do anything to hurt him, okay? But we need to show them he's safe. That's the only way. Lila looked uncertain, her gaze flicking toward her parents. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, placing a reassuring hand on her back. Sweetheart, what do you think? Do you trust him? Lila looked back at Agent Harris, her wide eyes searching his face. Finally, she nodded slowly. But only if I stay with him. You will, Harris assured her. No one's taking him away from you. Minutes later, a small group of doctors and scientists entered the room with rolling carts of equipment. The air felt colder as they set up, their nervous glances at the baby not going unnoticed. Agent Harris stood close to Lila, his presence a quiet reassurance as the doctors began their work. Okay, Dr. Evans said, his voice steady but careful. We're going to start with some non-invasive scans. Just to make sure everything's okay. Lila nodded, though her arm stayed firmly wrapped around the baby. It cooed softly, its black eyes darting around the room as though it could sense the tension. The doctors moved slowly, wheeling a small handheld scanner closer. It won't hurt, Dr. Evans said softly. We're just going to take a quick look, okay? Lila glanced at Harris, who gave her a small nod. It's okay, he said. I'm right here. Reluctantly, Lila loosened her hold on the baby just enough for the scanner to pass over it. The screen on the machine flickered to life, displaying glowing green and blue images that made the doctors freeze mid-motion. What is that? One of the scientists murmured, leaning closer to the screen. Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses, his voice full of awe. It's alive. Its vitals are strong, healthier than a human infant's. But look at this. He pointed to the screen, where a strange, swirling energy seemed to pulse faintly from the baby's core. Sarah and Michael stood close together, watching the doctors carefully. What does that mean? Michael asked warily. Dr. Evans looked up, his expression still stunned. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not harmful. At least, not biologically. Lila let out a quiet breath, her hand brushing over the baby's small arm. See, she said softly. I told you he's not dangerous. The baby let out another soft sound, and for a moment, the lights in the room seemed to glow brighter, the tension lifting. The doctors exchanged nervous glances, but none of them stepped back. Outside the room, Agent Grant paced furiously, his phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what Harris says, he snapped. We're dealing with something completely unknown. I want that room secured, and I want a containment team on standby. Agent Grant. He turned sharply to see Harris walking briskly toward him, his expression tight with frustration. What are you doing? Harris demanded. Doing my job, Grant shot back. You're too close to this. You're letting a child cloud your judgment? Harris grabbed his arm, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake. The baby isn't a threat. We've run preliminary scans. There's no sign of harmful intent. It's just a baby, Grant. Grant's expression hardened. That's what it wants us to think. Listen to yourself, Harris hissed. It's not some monster from a sci-fi movie. You're letting fear control you. Grant pulled his arm free, his voice cold. And you're letting emotion blind you. I'm not taking any chances. Back inside the hospital room, the tests were complete. Lila cradled the baby again, relief washing over her as the doctors began packing up their equipment. Dr. Evans approached her with a faint smile. You did great, he said softly. And so did he. There's nothing to worry about, Lila. Lila beamed, pressing a gentle kiss to the baby's forehead. I told you you'd be okay, she whispered. Sarah and Michael let out simultaneous breaths of relief, Sarah's hand clasping her husband's. Thank you, she said to Dr. Evans. But before anyone could say another word, the door burst open, and Agent Grant stormed in, flanked by 2 security guards in dark uniforms. Step away from the child, Grant ordered, his voice hard. Harris followed close behind him, anger flashing in his eyes. Grant, what are you doing? Taking control of the situation, Grant snapped. He pointed at Lila and the baby. "We're removing them from the hospital." "No." "No," Sarah cried, stepping protectively in front of her daughter. "You can't do this." Michael moved to her side, his voice loud and furious. "This is our child. You're not taking her anywhere." Lila clutched the baby tightly, her small voice breaking through the chaos. "Leave us alone." The baby let out a sharp, high-pitched sound, louder than before. The lights in the room flickered violently, and a deep, vibrating hum filled the air. Everyone froze as the sound grew louder and louder, the walls of the room seeming to tremble. "What the hell is happening?" Grant shouted, stumbling backward. The baby's black eyes glowed faintly as it cooed again, this time in a soothing tone. Slowly, the hum faded, and the lights steadied. The room fell silent once more, the air still crackling with invisible energy. Agent Grant stared at the baby, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. Harris stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Do you see now? It's not trying to hurt anyone. It's protecting her. Protecting itself." Grant didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out of the room, the security guards trailing behind him. Harris let out a slow breath before turning back to the family. "I'll make sure no one else tries to take him. You have my word." The room remained eerily quiet after Agent Grant's abrupt departure. Lila sat perfectly still, the alien-like baby nestled securely in her arms. Its black eyes blinked slowly, its faint hum vibrating in the air as if to reassure her. Michael and Sarah remained close, their gazes darting nervously between Lila, the baby, and Agent Harris, who was now pacing near the window. Harris finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Listen to me carefully. That wasn't the last of him. Grant's not going to let this go." Sarah folded her arms, her face pale with stress. "What does that mean? What are they going to do? They already tried to take our daughter." Harris stopped pacing and turned to face the family, his tone firm but sympathetic. "Grant isn't the only one watching this. People in much higher places are starting to take notice. They won't care about Lila's feelings or her connection to the baby. They'll see it as a threat, something to be controlled." Michael let out a frustrated breath, his hands clenching into fists. "You said you'd protect us. So what are we supposed to do?" Harris hesitated as though weighing his options. "I think it's time we get you out of here." Sarah's eyes widened. "But? You mean leave the hospital?" "Yes," Harris replied, his voice steady. "You can't stay here. They'll send more people, ones with fewer questions and more orders. If we leave now, I can buy you some time, at least until we figure out what to do next." Lila looked up from the baby, her voice small but resolute. "Where would we go?" Harris crouched so he was at eye level with her. "Somewhere safe. I have contacts who can help. People who don't ask questions and can give you a place to stay while we figure this out." Sarah's face contorted with worry, but Michael stepped forward, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect our daughter." Harris nodded. "Good. Then let's move quickly." The hallway outside the hospital room was quiet, but tension hung thick in the air. Harris peeked out first, making sure the coast was clear. "Follow me," he whispered, motioning for the family to stay close. Michael lifted Ava into his arms while Sarah held Lila's hand tightly. The alien baby was wrapped in a soft hospital blanket, tucked securely against Lila's chest. Its tiny head peeked out, and its black eyes blinked curiously as if sensing the urgency in the air. The group moved cautiously down the corridor, their footsteps muffled against the polished floor. Harris led them toward a side exit, staying close to the walls and checking corners as they went. Every creak, every distant voice sent a jolt of adrenaline through Sarah's veins, but she kept walking, her focus on Lila. As they neared the exit, the sound of hurried footsteps made Harris freeze. He held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. "Wait here," he whispered, disappearing around the corner. Michael clenched his jaw, shifting Ava's weight nervously. "This isn't going to work," he muttered under his breath. "They're going to find us." Sarah squeezed his arm gently. "Have faith. Harris knows what he's doing." Before Michael could respond, Harris reappeared, his expression tense but determined. "We're clear. Come on." He pushed open the exit door, and a rush of cool night air hit them like a wave. Outside, a black SUV was parked against the curb, its engine running. Harris motioned for them to hurry as he pulled open the back door. "Get in." Michael helped Sarah and Lila climb inside first, followed by Ava. He squeezed in after them, and Harris quickly slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind him. The sound echoed loudly, but no alarms or shouting followed. Harris glanced in the rearview mirror as the SUV pulled away from the hospital. The building shrank into the distance, its glowing windows disappearing into the night. "We made it," Sarah whispered, exhaling a shaky breath. "For now," Harris corrected. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Hours later, the SUV pulled up to an old, weathered farmhouse at the edge of a dense forest. The area was quiet, with no sign of other people for miles. Harris killed the engine and turned to face the family. "This place belongs to someone I trust," he said. "They use it as a safe house for people in trouble. You'll be safe here for a while." Lila peered out the window, her face curious. The farmhouse looked old, but it gave her a sense of calm. The baby shifted slightly in her arms, letting out a soft coo as if approving of the new surroundings. Harris opened the door and stepped out, motioning for them to follow. Michael carried Ava, who had fallen asleep during the drive, while Sarah and Lila trailed close behind. Inside, the farmhouse was small but comfortable. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, and the faint smell of pine lingered in the air. A fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace, casting warm light across the room. Harris turned to the family, his voice calm but serious. "You'll have everything you need here: food, water, and beds. There's no Wi-Fi or phones, but that's for your own safety. If anyone comes looking for you, I'll know." Michael set Ava down on a couch, his expression wary. "How long are we supposed to stay here?" "As long as it takes," Harris replied. "Until I can figure out how to make them leave you alone." Sarah glanced down at Lila, who was still holding the baby close. "And what about him?" she asked softly. "What if they find out he's here?" "They won't," Harris assured her. "Not if we're careful." Lila looked up at him, her voice soft. "You're really going to help us?" Harris smiled faintly. "Yeah, good. I am." That night, the farmhouse was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire. Michael and Sarah were asleep on an old mattress in one of the small rooms, while Lila sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, watching the flames dance. The baby was curled up on a blanket beside her, its dark eyes blinking sleepily. Lila stroked its small head, whispering softly, "Don't be scared. I'll keep you safe." The baby let out a faint hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. Lila smiled, feeling the connection between them grow stronger. "What are you?" she whispered. "Where did you come from?" The baby cooed softly, and for a brief moment, Lila felt something strange, a faint pressure in her mind, like a whisper she couldn't quite hear. She frowned, tilting her head. "Are you trying to talk to me?" she asked. The baby blinked, its large eyes unblinking and steady. The hum grew louder for a moment, and Lila suddenly felt something. A wordless emotion, a sense of loneliness, of longing. "You're lost," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Just like me." The baby cooed again, and the humming stopped. Lila stared at it for a long moment before curling up beside it, the firelight casting shadows on the walls. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, her eyelids growing heavy. "I promise." As Lila drifted off to sleep, the baby remained awake, its black eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly into the darkness, the night air still and silent. Back in the city, Agent Grant stood in a brightly lit control room, watching a large monitor that displayed live satellite footage of the area surrounding the hospital. "We lost them," a technician reported, his voice tense. "There's no sign of the vehicle anywhere." Grant's expression darkened, his jaw clenching tightly. "They're hiding. And I'll find them." The technician hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there's something else. We ran scans on the hospital's electrical systems after the incident earlier. Whatever caused that power surge, it wasn't human. And it's still active?" Grant turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" The technician adjusted the controls, zooming in on an area where faint energy pulses flickered on the screen. Whatever that baby is, it's emitting some kind of signal. Like it's trying to communicate. Grant's expression hardened. Find out where it's coming from. And send me the coordinates. This ends now. The early morning light seeped through the windows of the farmhouse, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. Lila woke slowly, her arms still cradling the strange baby, its faint hum vibrating softly against her chest. She sat up, glancing around. The room was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in days, there was no immediate fear. The baby blinked its large black eyes at her, cooing softly as if greeting her. Lila smiled faintly, brushing her hand across its smooth head. "Good morning," she whispered. "We're safe for now." In the next room, Sarah and Michael stirred awake. The previous day's events had drained them, but they both knew their fight wasn't over. Michael stretched, rubbing his face before looking around the small bedroom. "Where's Lila?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. Sarah sat up quickly, panic flickering in her eyes. "She was right here." They rushed out of the room, but their worry vanished the moment they saw her. Lila was sitting by the fire, the baby resting in her lap, both of them content and calm. Sarah let out a soft sigh of relief. "Good morning, sweetheart," Sarah said, kneeling beside her daughter. "Are you okay?" Lila nodded, looking up at her mother with a quiet determination. "Okay. He's okay too." Michael joined them, his eyes lingering on the baby. "What does he do, Lila? You keep saying he's not dangerous, but we saw what happened back at the hospital." Lila frowned, looking down at the small creature in her arms. "He doesn't mean to hurt anyone. It's just, when people try to take him or scare him, it's like he gets scared too. And he makes it stop." "Stop how?" Michael pressed. Lila paused for a moment, searching for the right words. "It's like he talks to things. The lights, I don't know how to explain it, but I can feel it." Michael exchanged a worried glance with Sarah, but before they could respond, the door to the farmhouse creaked open. Agent Harris entered, his expression tense but calm as he carried a bag of supplies. "Morning," he said, setting the bag on the table. "I brought food and some things you might need. No sign of Grant or anyone else yet, but we need to stay alert." Sarah stood, helping Harris unpack the bag. "How long can we stay here? How long before they find us?" Harris exhaled heavily, glancing toward the window. "Not long. I've been in this line of work for years, and I know how these people operate. They'll track the baby's signal eventually. It's only a matter of time." "What do you mean, signal?" Michael asked sharply. Harris hesitated before answering. "The baby isn't just some strange being. It's emitting an energy we've never seen before. It's like it's reaching out, trying to communicate, or trying to be found." "Found?" Sarah whispered, her face paling. "By who?" Harris shrugged grimly. "That's what we don't know. But whatever it is, it's powerful. And that's why Grant and his people won't stop until they get their hands on it." Michael clenched his jaw, frustration clear on his face. "So what are we supposed to do? Just wait for them to show up and take our daughter?" Harris shook his head. "Oh, I'm working on a way to get you farther off the grid, but it'll take time. Until then, we need to be ready." Lila, who had been quietly listening, looked up at Harris. "He doesn't want to be found," she said softly. "I can feel it. He's scared." Harris frowned, kneeling down so he was eye level with her. "Lila, can you feel more? Anything else? Like where he came from?" Lila paused, looking down at the baby. Its black eyes blinked up at her, and for a moment, she felt that strange pressure in her mind again. It wasn't painful, just a faint hum, like someone whispering in a language she couldn't quite understand. "I don't know where he came from," Lila said slowly, "but he's trying to tell me something. I just don't know how to hear him yet." The rest of the day passed in quiet tension. Harris worked to reinforce the farmhouse, covering windows and setting up small motion sensors he had brought along. Sarah cooked a simple meal while Michael paced nervously, watching the forest beyond the windows for any sign of movement. Lila stayed close to the baby, her bond with it growing stronger with every passing hour. She could feel its emotions now, its confusion, its fear, but also its trust. As the sun began to set, The quiet was shattered by the distant hum of engines. Harris froze mid-step, his head snapping toward the window. "Get down," he ordered sharply, pulling his gun from his holster. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Vehicles," Harris said. "They found us." Michael grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her toward the corner of the room. "What do we do?" Harris turned to Lila, his expression serious. "Lila, listen to me. You need to stay with the baby, no matter what happens. Do you understand?" Lila nodded quickly, clutching the baby tightly. Its hum grew louder, as if it could sense the danger. Harris moved toward the front door, peeking outside. The headlights of several black SUVs cut through the darkening forest, their engines rumbling as they came to a stop just outside the farmhouse. "Grant," Harris muttered under his breath. Outside, Agent Grant stepped out of the lead SUV, his face shadowed in the dim light. A team of heavily armed agents followed him, their rifles slung across their shoulders as they moved into position. Grant's voice rang out, cold and authoritative. "Harris, I know you're in there. This doesn't have to get ugly. Hand over the child, and no one gets hurt." Harris opened the door slightly, just enough to step out onto the porch. He kept his hands raised, his gun hidden at his side. "You're making a mistake, Grant. The baby isn't dangerous." Grant sneered, taking a step closer. "Don't give me that. You've seen what it can do. It's a threat, and we both know it." "It's scared," Harris countered. "That's all. You're the ones turning this into a fight." Grant's expression darkened. "Last chance, Harris. Step aside, or we're coming in." Harris's fingers tightened around the grip of his gun. "You're not getting the baby." Grant's eyes narrowed. "So be it." He raised his hand, signaling to the agents. "Move in." Inside the farmhouse, Lila flinched as the sound of footsteps thundered toward the house. The baby's hum grew louder, its body trembling slightly in her arms. "It's okay," she whispered, rocking it gently. "I won't let them take you. I promise." Michael grabbed a fire poker from the hearth, holding it like a weapon as he positioned himself between the door and his family. Sarah crouched beside Lila, tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter close. "Stay behind me," Michael said firmly. The front door exploded inward, sending splinters flying across the room. Agents stormed inside, their guns raised as they shouted orders. "Get down on the ground." "Now." Michael lunged forward, swinging the fire poker at the nearest agent. The man stumbled back, but another grabbed Michael by the arm, wrestling him to the ground. Sarah screamed, her arms wrapping protectively around Lila and the baby. "Leave us alone." Lila cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. The baby let out a piercing, high-pitched sound, louder than ever before. The agents froze in place, their faces contorting in confusion and fear as the lights in the farmhouse flickered violently. The air crackled with energy, and a deep hum vibrated through the walls. Harris, still outside, turned toward the farmhouse, his eyes widening as a beam of brilliant white light shot upward from the house, piercing through the dark sky. "What the hell?" Grant muttered, shielding his eyes. Inside, Lila clutched the baby tightly as the light filled the room, its energy radiating outward. She felt that same pressure in her mind again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper, it was a voice. "Home." Lila gasped, her tears stopping as the word echoed in her mind. "You're going home?" she whispered, looking down at the baby. The baby blinked up at her, its black eyes shimmering faintly. The light grew brighter, enveloping everything in a blinding glow. The agents screamed, stumbling backward as the energy overwhelmed them. Michael and Sarah huddled close to Lila, shielding their eyes as the hum reached its peak. And then, silence. When the light faded, the farmhouse was still. The agents were gone, their vehicles abandoned outside. The baby lay quietly in Lila's arms, its hum now soft and peaceful. Harris stumbled through the door, his face pale with shock. What just happened?" Lila looked up at him, a small, knowing smile on her face. "He's going home." The farmhouse was silent. Dust floated through the air as the glow of the mysterious light faded completely. The baby, nestled in Lila's arms, let out a soft hum, one that felt calmer, as though something had shifted. Its dark eyes blinked slowly, and for the first time, Lila felt the weight of its emotions change. The fear and confusion were still there, but now there was something else, a quiet sense of purpose. Sarah and Michael cautiously pulled away from Lila, their faces pale with disbelief. "Is everyone okay?" Michael croaked, his voice hoarse as he scanned the room. Lila nodded softly, still cradling the baby. "We're okay," she whispered. "He's okay." Agent Harris stumbled forward, his eyes darting around the room. "Where are they?" "The agents, where did they go?" Michael shook his head, still reeling from what had happened. "They were just here, they were right here." "They're gone," Lila said quietly. Harris turned to her sharply. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" Lila looked down at the baby, her fingers gently brushing its tiny green hand. "He sent them away. He didn't want to hurt them, he just wanted to stop them." Harris let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "None of this makes sense." Michael stepped forward, his tone sharp. "You said the baby was trying to communicate, trying to be found. What did you mean by that?" Harris turned to face them, his expression strained. "We ran energy scans back at the hospital. The baby was sending out a signal, something we couldn't decode. But it was strong, and it's still active." Lila looked up, her eyes wide. "He's not just trying to be found. Someone is coming. He told me." "Told you?" Sarah repeated, her voice trembling. "Lila, what are you talking about?" Lila frowned, trying to explain. "It's like, I can feel what he's feeling. And now I can hear him too, but not with words. He's calling for help, calling for home." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Harris looked around nervously, his instincts screaming that something big was coming. "If he's calling for someone, or something, then we need to be ready. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Lila shook her head firmly, clutching the baby closer. "It's okay. They're not here to hurt us. They're coming to take him home." Outside, the stillness of the forest was shattered by a low, distant rumble. It started faint, like thunder on the horizon, but it grew louder with every second. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the farmhouse walls seemed to hum in response. Michael rushed to the window, his face paling as he looked out. What is that?" Harris joined him, his expression darkening. A beam of light, identical to the one that had erupted from the baby earlier, was piercing down from the sky, its brilliance growing stronger as it neared the ground. It lit up the treetops in an otherworldly glow, and the rumbling grew deafening. Sarah grabbed Lila, her voice shaking. "Lila, what's happening?" Lila stood still, calm in the chaos. The baby cooed softly in her arms, its hum vibrating louder, as if it were responding to the light. "They're here," Lila said simply. Outside, the beam of light struck a clearing in the forest, illuminating everything with blinding clarity. From the center of the beam, shapes began to emerge, silhouettes that seemed to float effortlessly, glowing faintly as they moved closer to the ground. Harris opened the farmhouse door, stepping cautiously onto the porch as he squinted into the light. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Hovering just above the forest floor were tall, elegant figures. Their skin was the same soft green as the baby's, their eyes the same deep, black pools. They moved fluidly, almost as though they were weightless, and their presence seemed to vibrate with a kind of quiet power. Michael and Sarah joined Harris on the porch, their expressions frozen in shock. "Are those?" Sarah began, but her voice trailed off as the figures approached. The beings stopped a few yards from the house, their large eyes fixing on the farmhouse with a mixture of curiosity and something that almost resembled relief. Slowly, one of the figures stepped forward, raising a slender arm. Lila appeared in the doorway, the baby still held carefully in her arms. The hum that had followed the baby since its arrival now grew louder, harmonizing with a sound that the figures seemed to emit. It was soft and melodic, like music carried on the wind. "They're here for him," Lila said softly. Harris glanced back at her, his expression torn. "Are you sure this is safe?" Lila nodded, stepping down from the porch. The light seemed to grow warmer as she approached the figures, the baby cooing contentedly in her arms. Sarah moved as if to stop her, but Michael placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Let her go," he said quietly. "She knows what she's doing." The lead figure knelt as Lila approached, its glowing presence almost ethereal up close. It extended its long arms, its black eyes soft and kind. Lila hesitated for a moment before holding the baby out, placing him gently into the figure's hands. The baby blinked up at its rescuer, cooing softly as the hum began to fade. The figure cradled the baby close, and for a moment, it looked back at Lila, its gaze full of gratitude. Lila felt a strange warmth fill her chest, a sense of peace washing over her as though the baby's emotions had merged with her own one last time. "Thank you," the emotion seemed to whisper. "You're welcome," she whispered back, tears glistening in her eyes. The figures began to retreat into the beam of light, their movements graceful and silent. The baby nestled against the lead figure, its black eyes flicking back to Lila one last time before the light began to grow brighter. Lila stepped back, shielding her eyes as the beam pulsed, the rumbling sound filling the air again. The figures rose higher and higher, disappearing into the brilliance until, finally, the beam shot upward, piercing the sky before vanishing completely. The forest fell silent. The air was still, the light gone as if it had never been there. Harris exhaled shakily, his voice breaking the silence. "They're gone." Michael wrapped an arm around Sarah as they stepped toward Lila, who stood quietly in the clearing, staring at the empty sky. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked softly, brushing Lila's hair back. Lila nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "He's safe now. He's where he belongs." Michael crouched beside her, his voice soft. "You did something incredible, Lila. You saved him." Lila smiled faintly, looking up at her parents. "He saved me too. He showed me I could be brave." Harris stood nearby, his gaze fixed on the sky. After everything he'd seen, his disbelief had been replaced by something else, wonder. He turned back to the family, shaking his head with a quiet smile. "I don't think anyone would believe me if I told them what happened here." Sarah smiled softly, wrapping her arms around Lila. "Then maybe it's better if we keep this to ourselves?" Michael nodded, glancing at the now empty clearing. "The world isn't ready for something like this." "Not yet?" Harris agreed silently, his hands slipping into his pockets. He turned to Lila, his expression warm. "You're one brave kid. You gave that little one a chance to find his way home. Not many people could have done that." Lila looked up at him, her smile small but genuine. "He wasn't alone. And he didn't want me to be alone either." Harris nodded, his heart heavy but full of admiration for the girl. "You weren't. You had all of us." Together, the family turned back toward the farmhouse, the quiet forest now bathed in the soft light of dawn. Lila took one last look at the sky, the faintest shimmer of stars still lingering in the pale blue. "Goodbye," she whispered softly, her voice carried by the wind. And for the first time since the baby had arrived, Lila felt a deep, quiet peace, like everything had fallen into place.